What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Murph, and today we're going to go through and talk about our updated free-to-play November 2023 farming guide. Now, funny story, I actually went through and recorded this video a couple days ago and included all of the updates from the last month or so. Was ready to publish it, put it out, schedule it for release tomorrow, or I guess today when you're seeing it now. And then we got slammed with a huge new update today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of go through briefly, again, how we establish how everything is ranked and tiered out. And then we're going to talk about some of the changes from last month's farming guide, and then go through the actual, area by area guide for the game. So if you guys are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe if you're enjoying the content, like the video, it helps the algorithm out, and drop a comment down below. Let me know if you agree, disagree, or what you guys are working on your squads. So without further ado, let's talk about what has changed since last month's guide. So first off, we had the addition of Chapter 4 of the Mines of Moria raid, and that addition of the chapter has really kind of updated our tier rankings for the teams themselves based on how they're performing in Chapter 4 of the raid. Whereas you're seeing some of the teams that were ranked a little higher, from my opinion, in the other chapters, such as Isengard, Rohan, or maybe, let's see, what else do we have? Isengard, Rohan, Gondor, for instance. Some of them are not performing in Chapter 4, not necessarily Rohan, but Gondor and Isengard. So you'll see some of those teams kind of drop down a little bit. You'll also go ahead and see teams like Road to Rivendell climb a little bit because they are performing okay in Chapter 4. And right now, since we only have two teams performing well, performing okay in Chapter 4 is basically like performing great but not amazing in other chapters. So it's kind of it hasn't done a whole lot to the top of the meta or the bottom of the meta, but it's kind of swapped some things around kind of towards the middle tier of teams from where I'm looking at it. But in addition to Chapter 4, we also had Chapter 1 changes. Now, those happened in late September. However, it happened so late in September that I did not take into consideration those changes and how they impacted the meta with last month's farming guide, because we didn't have any data at that time. We didn't have enough people able to run through the raid between when the changes happened and when I released the video. So those are now taken into account. We also had the Haradrim characters added free to play from Bekelu and Tebeb. So that has impacted Haradrim's farmability and has essentially made them a free to play team. And now with the update we just got today on the 31st, we actually are now seeing a more farming friendly version of Tebeb in the challenge store, which even brings them up a little bit higher. They're still one of the highest performing teams in the raid, and we'll see that in a second. Now, some of the other additions that happened today was the addition of Bifur as a free-to-play character, and we also saw Eldred and Gruher, the Brute Troll, added into free-to-play as well. Now, to note as well, we are probably seeing Gondor added as free-to-play in mid-November for that Faramir, Boromir, and December for Denethor, unless they decide to push all of them to the right and release them all as free-to-play characters at the same time. But that should be the next team that we're looking at free-to-play. So, with knowing what has changed since last time, let's talk about the teams, kind of preface how we're actually ranking these different characters and farms. Now, first off, like I mentioned earlier, this infographic is made by Raiden. He, in one of the unofficial discords for the game, has been putting forth these amazing infographics on kind of a really brief overview on how the chapters work. In addition to that, what teams are performing at what level. Some of the earlier chapters, I believe he's going back right now and working on the earlier chapters with new teams that have released since those chapters released to kind of update all those chapters. But these resources are phenomenal for you to put out to your guild if you are struggling with certain chapters of the raid, or are really looking at what teams you can build to further your own personal score or up that overall guild score. So shout out to Raiden in the unofficial Discord. This is all his work. Thank you for putting this out for all of us. And if you are not utilizing these resources, hop into the unofficial Discord, download these to your Discord channel, post them in resources so that your guildmates can get access to it and you guys aren't really walking around blind. So Chapter 4, as I mentioned, there's really only two teams that are performing very well, and that's going to be your Balin's Expedition team. So that's Balin, both of the elves from Lorien, as well as kind of whatever other doors you want to add in, whether it's Billy Killy or Gimli, maybe like a Gimli Legolas combo, something like that. We're also seeing Rivendell again as a top team currently, and then we're seeing Rohan, Road to Rivendell, and Haradrim in the mid tier. And then basically everything else is low tier, like you're gonna do difficulty 1, hit 100k damage or 100k points, and kind of call it a day. So that's chapter 4 right now, and this is kind of what we're looking at for the current raid team tier list. And again, what I did last month is I went through basically the same infographics for all the channels, or all the chapters rather, and kind of did my own point system based off of you get a super low score if you're a very good team, like a top tier team in a chapter. You get a higher score the worse off you are in a chapter. Then you kind of go in the middle of that point system if you're a middle team, and then add up that average across all the chapters. If you have a lower number in general, you're higher up on the list, you're a better team. If you have a higher number, you're lower on the list. So with that, this snapshot isn't taking into account specific chapters of performance. It's taking into account, if you build this team, how well it's going to perform across the entire spectrum of the raid, so all 4 chapters. So what we're seeing still is that Rivendell and Haradrim are still holding as the number 1 and 2 raid teams across the board right now. Even though Haradrim might not be the best team in any given chapter, they are still a top team in multiple chapters, and a good team in chapter 4. And next up, we have this kind of light green tier that is kind of your good, not great raid teams. So it's going to be Rohan, Goblins, and Road to Rivendell has actually jumped up from the middle tier simply because, like I mentioned earlier, they're performing okay in chapter 4. They're performing really well in chapter 1, and they're performing fairly well in chapters 2 and 3. Gondor and Isengard have both dropped down into this kind of mid-tier of teams. Now, just because they're yellow, it's not a bad team. These are still good teams to work on. However, you might not be able to utilize them as well as you could higher teams across the entire raid. For instance, Gondor is still a absolute number 1 or number 2 team in chapter 3. Isengard is still a number 1 or number 2 team in chapter 2. However, both of them are performing horribly in chapter 4. Gondor doesn't perform well at all in chapter 2. Chapter 1, they perform fairly well. In Isengard, they're performing well in chapter 1, amazing in chapter 2, kind of okay in chapter 3, and they're absolutely terrible in chapter 4. Now, there is kind of some speculation on maybe a resurgence in certain members of that team, running them underneath a Bolg lead with a Misty Mountain Orc build, maybe with the Brute Troll, since he's now free to play farmable. But I haven't seen any solid data or numbers on that yet. Now, in this next tier, this is kind of your bad tier. Rangers and Elves, like a non-Elrond Elves team, or mainly like your leftovers after your Rivendell team if you have Elrond. Rangers, I would really only recommend running and specifically farming out Rangers if you don't have Elrond. So you would really only run Rangers if you don't have Elrond, if you don't have Road to Rivendell, because this team, as I've mentioned before, gets cannibalized by 3 other teams that are better than it. Faramir is technically a Ranger, but he goes with Gondor once you have them online. Strider goes with Road to Rivendell. And then Eldon and Elroy here, the Elven twins, they're going to be running with Rivendell. So once you actually build your account up and you're running multiple teams, this team's just not going to be viable. And then we have our very bad list, like I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. We have Mordor, we have Misty Mountain Bolg, and we have Dunland. Dunland still doesn't even have a full team, so they're irrelevant. Misty Mountain Bolg is still only 4 out of 5 characters available, even though the Brute Troll just released free-to-play farmable. Some of the individual characters on this team are great, like Bolg is decent and the Brute Troll is good, but really it's not a full team yet, and Nuraz is a pretty good plug-and-play for Chapter 3, so some individual characters on this team have their own niche usability in the raid, but the team as a whole is just not doing well. Mordor, I have gotten into it with several very, very low-end guilds that I have a third account kind of bouncing around guilds in right now, and the consensus is these teams are bad, and these guilds are not good. They're still stuck in Chapter 1, and they're seeing Mordor's performance in Chapter 1 and taking that as their performance across the entire raid. Now, Mordor can put up 600-700k when at full gear 8. In Chapter 1, they can do fairly well. However, in the rest of the raid, they're absolutely irrelevant in Chapter 2. They can't put out enough damage or sustain against the Troll. In Chapter 3, in addition to Chapter 2, the Troll has such a high resistance that you can not reliably land debuffs on difficulty 3. In Chapter 3, they don't do well at all because they have not enough sustain, they have no cleanses, they have, for the most part, bad speed. In Chapter 4, you can't even touch the Balrog. You'll get destroyed. In this bottom tier of kind of teal teams between Balin and Dol Guldur, both of these teams are fairly new. Balin's been out for a couple weeks now. Ballin is a top tier team in Chapter 4, but I don't have enough feedback or data to support chapters 1 through 3 with Ballin lead. And kind of what I'm hearing is that with your dwarves, at least, you can run a Biffer lead team in Chapter 2 and then a Ballin lead team in Chapter 4, but I don't have any information in Chapters 1 or 3 how they're performing, so that's why they're down here. And Dol Guldur, as of this moment, has not come out yet. And it remains to be seen how this team performs in the raid, but looking at their kit, it seems more like the team's going to be geared more towards PvP, whether it's Arena or the future Grand Arena Challenge or whatever. So now that we have the teams and the tiers established, we're going to roll into some of the areas to farm these characters. And first off, the challenge store. We've got Tabeb added here. Tabeb being on your Haradrim team should be your main farm out of here, with Halbarad second as a halfway decent plug-and-play character, and then Bolg, which again, Bolg's team is not performing well at all. Now, after the challenge store, we're going to have the arena store. And the arena store, we've got Eomer as a Rohan team member, one of the best individual characters to run in Chapter 1. We've got Golbers from the Goblins, and both these teams performing well in the raid. We've got Legolas, who serves as a halfway decent way to farm Elrond if you're trying to spread your resources out for your farms, as well as a kind of plug-and-play character with Gimli, with your dwarf teams, or with Balin to fill in for the raids. And there are some niche teams that utilize Legolas as a leader in Chapter 2 for your elf teams, but honestly, I prefer to just run Elrond and call it a day. And then, of course, we've got Shagrat on the Mortar team cleaning up the bottom of here. We've also got our guild store, and Wubate should be our first farm out of the guild store because we want to get Haradrim online as soon as possible now that they are free to play. We've then got Biffer as our second target to farm in order to run him as a Chapter 2 lead, and it's somewhat of a fill-in in Chapter 4 under Balin. And then we've got Miri for Rangers, who honestly I wouldn't even touch. Once you farm out Wubate and Biffer, I would probably just focus the rest of my currency on the ability materials that pop up there, or sometimes there are like crystals that pop up there. But ultimately, I would either spend it on some of the resources in the store instead of Miri, or I would go ahead and just hoard up currency for the next one to become farmable here. Now, the light campaign is a pretty lengthy entry here, and we're going to see two of our Rivendell elf characters, Eladin and Lomion, in there, so I would farm them as soon as possible, get them online, get Rivendell rolling. We've got Yefti from the Haradrim, and then we've also got the Brute Troll, who was just recently added as of today, who is really, really good in Arena and serves as a fairly good plug-and-play. I'm honestly not sure how he performs across the raid because I haven't seen much of him used as a plug-and-play character in the raid. I've only seen his entire team not do well in the raid. So take that with a grain of salt. We've got Eothane and Wilfwin, both for the Rohan team. And really, you only need to run a full Rohan team in Chapter 2, but these are available to farm, as well as Orphers for your Misty Mountain Goblins, and then Frodo Baggins for your Road to Rivendell team, for your Sam Gamgee unlock, as well as for the raid as a whole. Now we've got Mauher and Azhak on here as well for the Isengard team down in the mid tier, as well as Hrendil for Gondor. So if you want to get Gondor online as soon as it becomes free to play farmable, you can start farming him out. You can work on Mauher and Azhak if your guild is still struggling with Chapter 2 of the raid and need to push to Chapter 3 of the raid, because Isengard is still performing amazing here. We've got Killy as a dwarf in Thorin's company, and I still think we're going to get a Thorin Legend event using dwarves or Thorin's company eventually, but I'm now becoming kind of suspicious that our next legendary with the release of this Dol Guldur team is going to utilize the Dol Guldur team with two more Dol Guldur, say it 5 times fast, characters released next month as marquees, and then we'll probably see like the Necromancer, I think is kind of where I'm leaning now, which really is just a form of Sauron during the events of The Hobbit that was in Mirkwood. But I think that's kind of the direction we're leaning right now for our next legendary in like early December, mid-December maybe, but purely speculation, obviously. And then at the bottom, we've got Rachma. For our Mordor Orcs, we've got Nuraz, who, as I've mentioned, he's only down here this low because his team is performing this poorly, but Nuraz can be farmed and built in order to be a plug-and-play character, especially in Chapter 3 of the raid. Being able to spread block around is pretty, you get a lot of additional points on that team, so you can run him with, like, if you've got Isengard built up for Chapter 2, just plug Nuraz in and spread some additional block out there for bonus points. Now, the Shadow campaign, nothing has really changed here aside from some of the placements. We've got Arwen still up here, high up for the Rivendell team. We've got Robel for our Haradrim raid team, as well as I've still got the Witch King kind of thing here because it was data mined in the beta that Haradrim would be used to unlock the Witch King in a legendary event. We still haven't seen that. Game's been out for almost 6 months now, so Who knows if this is even still happening, but take that with a grain of salt. And then, of course, we've got Lady Aowen for our Rohan team. We've got Chief Kraska for the Goblins. We've got Sergeant Ara for Gondor, who I obviously forgot to update her placement. She should be down in the next tier along with Dunhar and Morza. And we got Mary Brandybuck, again, your Road to Rivendell team for your raids and building up Sam as well. And then in the mid tier, we've got Dunhar and Morza for our Chapter 2 Isengard team. Then we've got 2 more dwarves. We've got Feely with Thorin's Company and Fro. And then we've got Leliel, who Leliel I really wouldn't recommend farming unless you're a low-level account and you don't have access to some of these other elf characters to unlock Elrond. You can farm out Leliel pretty early in the campaigns in order to start getting that star count up so you can unlock Elrond. And then we've got Tordok, who's another Misty Mountain Orc. And then we've got Grimlers and Uzhan down here rounding out our Mordor team. And now finally, we've got the guild campaign, and we do have a couple of new additions here. First off, we do have Elrohir, who I think between Elrohir and Gaz Ironhide should really be your first 2 farms out of the guild campaign at this point in the game. Elrohir is one of the pivotal pieces of your Elrond Rivendell team, and Ironhide is still a very, very good plug-and-play character for at least Chapter 1 in the raid, as well as for your free-to-play arena team. Now, Naramiri is also a very quick farm in the guild campaign. Everything in here bears mentioning that the guild campaign is the fastest, most reliable way to farm characters. So if you're trying to unlock Elrond, you should probably focus Elrohir and Naramiri to knock out 2 of your 5-star requirements as soon as possible. And Naramiri is also used in Chapter 3 and sometimes in Chapter 4, depending who you talk to, in order to really push out additional points with your Rivendell team. And then Bekelu is another Haradrim character. I've already got her at 5 stars, working on 6 at the moment on my main account. That is, again, a quick Haradrim farm there as well. And then we also had Ealdred added as the Rohan healer today in the new update. So you can now farm Ealdred in Chapter 1 of the guild campaign, rather, in order to really build out that Rohan team so that you can use a full Rohan team in Chapter 2 if you choose to. And if you choose not to, it's not the end of the world, because you can ultimately just run the main Rohan E3 comp and use plug-and-play characters. We've also got Pippin up here for your Road to Rivendell team. And then after that, we've got Ugluk for our Isengard team. You can choose to farm him earlier on if you want. He's still very good in the arena, and he's a very, very quick farm to get Isengard up and running, and he'll be able to tank a lot of additional damage the stronger you build him. Additionally, we've also got Gimli for your kind of Dwarf and Fellowship teams, even though we don't have a full 5 Fellowship team yet. Kind of curious when we're going to get the last 2 for that. And then, of course, we got Edric rounding out that 3 out of 5 Dunlin team, which is irrelevant, doesn't bear mentioning. So, guys, that is it for this month. Good luck farming. Good luck in the raid. I hope you guys progress well, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm going to sign off for the day. I got some more videos coming out in the next couple of days, probably revolving around specific use of Rivendell in the raid team to kind of give you guys some of that insight and information and how that team plays through as we start to unlock Rivendell over the next week or so. And then we're probably also going to do some other... I'm brain farting. I don't remember what else we're doing, but we're going to do more videos. So see you guys later. Love you. Bye.